A finger stabbed into a man's chest, hard, twice. The thud of it echoed across the room. Boots scraped the floor as a big man leaned in close, breathing down on someone half his size. A wooden broom clattered to the ground. Somewhere under a bench, a cat went still. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. 30 students froze where they stood, eyes locked on the slim man who had just been shoved. He didn't shove back. He didn't even flinch. He looked down at the finger pressed against his chest, then up at the man who owned it, and he smiled. Slow. Calm. The big man had no idea the quiet floor sweeper in front of him was a fighter named Bruce Lee. So what does a man like that do when a stranger jabs a finger in his chest? The next 90 seconds answered it. Stay with me on this one. Let me take you back to how this started. Oakland, California. The fall of 1964. Up a flight of creaking stairs above a print shop in Chinatown, there was a single long room that a slim young man had turned into a training hall. It wasn't much. Bare wood floors, a few hanging bags, a mirror with a crack running down one corner. But every evening that room filled up with people who wanted to learn how to move, how to fight, how to defend themselves. And the man teaching them was 23 years old. His name was Bruce Lee. Now, in 1964, almost nobody knew that name. He wasn't a movie star yet. He wasn't on a single poster. He was just a young teacher with a wife at home, a baby on the way, and a way of moving that made grown men rub their eyes and look again. He taught anyone who walked in the door. Chinese, white, black, Filipino, Mexican. That alone made him enemies in certain circles. There were old men in that city who believed the fighting arts belonged to one people and one people only, passed down quiet, kept behind closed doors. They believed an outsider should never be shown the inside of a fist. Bruce had heard the whispers. He'd been warned more than once to be careful who he led up those stairs. But Bruce didn't care about circles, and he didn't care about whispers. He cared about truth. He used to say a punch should be a punch, plain and honest, no decoration. He used to tell his students that styles divide people, and a real fighter doesn't have a style. He has a body and a brain and the man in front of him. That's all. That evening the room was busy. About 30 students were running drills, pivoting on the balls of their feet, throwing the same straight punch over and over until their arms shook. And in the corner, with a broom in his hand, Bruce was sweeping the floor himself. He always did. He believed the teacher cleaned his own house. A man who's too proud to push a broom, he said, is too proud to learn anything. Beside him, curled on a folded mat, was an old gray cat named Biscuit. Biscuit had wandered up those stairs a year before and simply decided to stay. The students fed him scraps. Bruce pretended to be annoyed by him and then saved the warmest corner for him every single night. So that's the picture. A quiet young man in a black t-shirt sweeping. A cat half asleep at his feet. A room full of students working hard, sweat darkening the back of their shirts, the smell of canvas and dust in the air. Then the door opened. The man who walked in did not belong to that room. You could see it in a second. He was big. Military big. Thick neck, flat knuckles, a crew cut shaved close on the sides. He wore a pressed jacket with a pin on the chest, the kind a man wears when he wants you to know he's won things. He stood in the doorway and let everyone look at him. He wanted them to look. That was the whole point of standing there. His name was Tatsuo Mishima, and in the world of full-contact karate that name meant something. Mishima was a Kyokushin champion. Undefeated. Now, if you don't know what that means, let me put it plainly. Kyokushin is one of the hardest, most brutal styles of karate there is. No padding, no pulled punches. You hit each other for real, full power, body and legs, until one man can't continue. Men walked out of those tournaments with broken ribs and called it a good day. And Mishima had stood in those rings again and again and walked out every single time with his hand raised. Dozens of fights, not one loss. He had the trophies. He had the scars across his shins from 1,000 low kicks. And he had something more dangerous than either. He had certainty. He believed all the way down to his bones that no man alive could touch him. He'd stopped wondering about it years ago. To Miss Hema, it wasn't pride. It was just a fact like the sun coming up. He'd been hearing things about Oakland, about a Chinatown kid teaching some new street style to anybody who paid, teaching outsiders, mixing things that weren't supposed to be mixed. And to a man like Miss Hema, that wasn't just wrong. It was an insult. A real fighter earned his rank in the ring, under the rules, in front of judges who knew what they were watching. This kid was handing out secrets above a print shop like they were candy. To Miss Hema, a thing given away freely was a thing made worthless, so he came to prove a point. He walked down the middle of the room, slow, looking everyone over, and the drilling stopped. One by one the students went quiet and stepped back against the walls. Miss Hema looked at the cracked mirror. He looked at the hanging bags. He pushed one with 2 fingers and watched it swing, and the corner of his mouth turned down like he'd tasted something off. He looked at the students like they were children playing dress-up. And then he looked for the teacher. His eyes passed right over Bruce, skipped him completely. Because the man with the broom couldn't possibly be the one in charge. Miss Hema was looking for someone bigger, someone older, someone who looked the way a teacher was supposed to look. "Where is the teacher?" he said. His English was clipped and hard. Nobody answered. A few students glanced toward the corner, toward the slim man with the broom. Miss Hema followed their eyes, and when he understood, he laughed, out loud, a short, ugly laugh. "This," he said, "this is the famous teacher." Bruce didn't laugh back. He set the broom against the wall, slow and careful, and he looked at Miss Hema with the same calm a man uses to study the weather. "I'm the teacher," he said. "Can I help you?" Miss Hema walked right up to him. Up close, the size difference was almost funny. Miss Hema had a head of height on him and a good 50 pounds. He looked down at Bruce the way you'd look at something you found on the bottom of your shoe. "I came to see if it's true," Miss Hema said. "They say you teach fighting to anyone." "For money." He looked around at the students against the wall, the white faces, the black faces, the brown ones. "They say you teach our secrets to people who didn't earn them." "I teach people who want to learn," Bruce said. "You teach garbage," Miss Hema said. "And someone has to show these children the truth before they get themselves hurt believing in you." Bruce was quiet for a moment. He looked around at his own students, at the young ones who'd come up those stairs because nobody else in the city would take them. Then he looked back at Miss Hema, and his voice stayed level. "You can watch a class if you'd like," Bruce said. "Sit down, see for yourself. Then you can decide what's garbage." But Miss Hema hadn't come to sit down. He'd never sat down for anything in his life. He raised his hand and he jabbed his finger into Bruce's chest. Hard, the same jab from the very start of this story. Once, then again harder, pushing Bruce back half a step. "Fight me," Miss Hema said. "Right now. Let them watch their teacher learn his place." The room went dead quiet. 30 students and you couldn't hear a single breath. Down at the floor, Biscuit lifted his head, felt something in the air, and slipped off the mat and under a bench. Even the cat knew. Bruce looked down at the finger still pressed against his chest. He looked at it for a long moment, the way you look at something that's broken a rule it shouldn't have broken. Then he looked back up. And here's the thing about Bruce Lee that Miss Hema couldn't have known. Bruce had a temper. As a teenager in Hong Kong, he'd been in real street fights, the bloody kind, the kind that got him shipped across an ocean to keep him out of trouble. There were rooftops in Hong Kong where boys settled things with their fists, and Bruce had stood on more than one of them. He had spent years since learning to put that fire in a box and close the lid. He'd trained himself to breathe through it, to let the first hot rush pass before he did anything. But the fire never left. and a finger in the chest in his own house in front of his own students. That was the one thing guaranteed to crack the lid. He didn't shout. That wasn't his way. He reached up, took the bottom of his sleeve and rolled it slowly up to the elbow, then the other one. He set his feet a little wider on the wood floor he had just swept. Every student in the room had seen him roll those sleeves before, in private, and they knew what it meant. "Are you sure?" Bruce asked, quiet, almost gentle. "I want you to be sure, because once we start I'm not going to stop just because you want me to." Miss Hema smiled. He thought it was a bluff. He'd heard small men talk big before. They always talked big right up until the first real punch landed. "I'm sure," he said. He stepped back and dropped into his stance, the textbook Kyokushin stance, fists tight, weight low, perfect form. He'd held that stance in front of thousands of people. He raised one fist and waved Bruce forward with the other. Two fingers, "Come on, come to me." That was the moment it became real. That was the line they couldn't step back over. Two students by the door looked at each other, and one of them quietly turned the lock because whatever happened next, nobody wanted it spilling down the stairs into the street. Bruce didn't take a fancy stance. He just lifted his hands loose, almost lazy, one forward and one back, weight light on his feet. And he waited. Miss Hema came in fast. For a big man he was quick, and he led with a punch that had ended a lot of fights. A straight right thrown with his whole body behind it, aimed right at Bruce's jaw. It hit nothing but air. Bruce wasn't there. He had moved maybe 6 inches, a small turn of the hips, and the punch sailed past his ear so close it stirred his hair. And in the same half-second before Miss Hema could pull the fist back, Bruce's open hand tapped him on the cheek. Not a strike. A tap, pat, pat, like you'd wake a sleeping child. The room made a sound, a sharp little intake of breath from 30 people at once. Miss Hema froze. He had felt that tap, and he understood exactly what it meant. It meant that if Bruce had wanted to, that hand could have been a fist and the fight would already be over. It meant the small man had read the punch before it left his shoulder. Miss Hema stepped back. His face had gone red. He looked at Bruce, and something flickered behind his eyes, the first crack in all that certainty. He lowered his hands, and then he did something nobody expected. He straightened up out of his stance, and he laughed again, softer this time, and he nodded slowly like a man who'd seen enough. "Quick," he said. "You're quick, I'll give you that." He rolled his shoulders and took a step back toward the door. "Maybe there's something here after all. Maybe I was wrong about you." He turned and walked back up the room toward the stairs, reaching for his jacket on the hook. The students against the wall began to breathe again. A few of them smiled. One let out a nervous laugh, the kind that comes out when a thing you were scared of turns out to be nothing. It looked like it was over. It looked like the big champion had taken his measure of the quiet teacher, found more than he expected, and decided to go home with his pride mostly intact. Bruce lowered his hands. Down by the bench, Biscuit poked his gray head out, decided the danger had passed, and padded back toward his warm mat. Bruce even reached for his broom again because the floor still wasn't finished, and a job left half done bothered him more than any insult. The room relaxed. It was over. It wasn't over. Miss Hema's hand reached the door, but it didn't reach for the handle. It reached past the jacket on the hook and pulled a folded sheet of paper out of the inside pocket. And when he turned back around, the friendly look was gone from his face like it had never been there at all. "You think I came up here alone," he said, "to test myself against a floor sweeper." He unfolded the paper and held it up so the room could see it. Official letterhead. A stamp at the bottom. Signatures. "I came with a message," Miss Hema said, "from people who matter, people who decide who is allowed to teach in this country and who is not." He let that sit. "You are teaching things you have no right to teach to people who have no right to learn them, And there are men, important men, who want this room closed. They sent me to close it." Down the stairs, Boots started climbing, 2 of them. They came up slow, in no hurry at all, and that was somehow worse than if they'd run. They filled the doorway behind Miss Hema, both of them big, both wearing the same pin on the chest. Black belts. They didn't say a word. They didn't have to. They folded their arms and blocked the only way out. And just like that, the whole thing had changed. "Stay with me here, because this is the part that matters." A minute ago this was one proud man wanting to save face in front of some students. A bruised ego, nothing more. Now it was something else entirely. Now there were 3 of them and one door and a piece of paper that said the quiet young man's school, the thing he'd built with his own hands, the thing that fed his pregnant wife, could be taken away from him. This wasn't about pride anymore. This was about whether Bruce Lee got to keep his life. Miss Hema folded the paper and tucked it back in his pocket. "Here is how it will go," he said. "You and me, a real fight, no little taps on the cheek, full contact the way real men do it. If you win, we walk down those stairs and you never hear from us again." He smiled. "If I win, you close this school tonight. You stop teaching outsiders, and you sign this paper saying you were beaten fair by a better man, so these children can see the truth with their own eyes." He cracked his knuckles, one hand and then the other. "And if you refuse," he said, "we close it for you tonight the hard way, with them watching." Bruce looked at the 2 men in the doorway. He looked at his students, pressed back against the walls, some of them barely more than kids, a couple of them with their fists half raised like they were thinking about helping and didn't know how. He caught the eye of one of his youngest students, a boy of maybe 17, and he gave the smallest shake of his head. "Stay back. This is mine." He looked at the spot by the bench where Biscuit had vanished again. And then he looked back at Miss Hema, and whatever was left of the calm teacher went quiet inside him, and something older took its place. "My wife is at home," Bruce said softly. "We're having a baby. This room pays for that. You came into my house, you put your finger in my chest, and now you want to take the food off my table." He nodded slowly, mostly to himself. "All right, you'll get your real fight." He walked to the center of the floor, the part he'd just swept clean. "But you should have left when you had the chance." Miss Hema grinned and charged. No more testing now. He came in throwing everything, a heavy hook aimed to take Bruce's head off, the kind of punch that had folded grown men in tournaments. Bruce stepped inside it, not away. Inside. He moved toward the punch instead of back, slipped under the arc of it, and drove the heel of his palm straight up into Miss Hema's jaw. There was a crack like a board breaking. Miss Hema's head snapped back and his whole body stumbled 3 steps until his back hit the wall, and the wall shook, and a framed picture jumped off its nail and shattered on the floor. The room exploded. 30 students shouting at once. The 2 men in the doorway unfolded their arms, and the great undefeated champion stood against the wall with blood on his lip, blinking, trying to remember where he was. If you're still with me and your heart is going a little, do me one favor and hit that subscribe button right now. Because what Bruce Lee did in the next 60 seconds, with 2 more men closing in and the whole room watching, is the part nobody ever forgot. For a second, nobody moved. Miss Hema pushed himself off the wall. The blood on his lips seemed to wake something mean in him, because now the showmanship was gone and what was left was just a big, dangerous man who had never, not once, been on the wrong end of a fight. He wiped his mouth with the back of his hand, looked at the red smear, and his face twisted. He stared at the blood like it was a thing that couldn't exist, like the rules of the world had broken in front of him. "Lucky," he spat. He came again, and this time he was careful. He'd learned. He didn't throw wild. He stalked forward behind a high guard, jabbing, feeling the distance, cutting off the floor so Bruce couldn't circle. This was the Mishima who'd won all those tournaments, patient, heavy, closing the space inch by inch until Bruce's back was near the mirror. This was the fighter the trophies were for. Bruce let him come. And the students who knew him saw it, saw the little smile that wasn't really a smile because they'd learned the hard way that when Bruce backed up he was setting something. He never moved by accident. Every step had a reason, even the ones that looked like retreat. Mishima committed. He launched a front kick, big and powerful, straight at Bruce's stomach, enough force to break ribs. Bruce wasn't there. He'd already stepped off the line, a quarter turn to the side, and the kick blew past him and hit nothing. And for just a moment, Mishima was on one leg, fully committed, wide open. Bruce hit him 3 times before the foot came back down. Nobody in that room could have counted them. A straight punch to the body that folded Mishima forward, a back fist that snapped across his cheekbone, and then a low kick that took the leg out from under him. Mishima went down to one knee on the wooden floor with a thud that everyone felt in their feet. That was when the other two charged. They came off the door together, fast, one from each side, exactly the way you'd plan it if you wanted to swarm a man before he could set himself. And here's where the whole night turned into something the students would still be telling their grandchildren about. Because Bruce didn't panic and he didn't back up. He moved into the gap between the two men, where only one of them could reach him at a time, and he dealt with them a second and a half apart. The first one threw a haymaker. Bruce caught the wrist, pulled instead of pushed, and used the man's own weight to swing him face first into the cracked mirror. The glass came down in a sheet. The second man grabbed for Bruce from behind and got a fistful of t-shirt, and Bruce dropped his weight, drove an elbow back into the man's middle, spun, and put him on the floor with a short punch that traveled maybe 4 inches. 4 inches. That was all the room he needed. He'd spent years learning how to put a man down from the length of a thumb, and now a whole room got to see why it mattered. 2 of them down. And Bruce had barely moved from the spot he'd swept clean. Mishima was back on his feet by then, swaying a little, and what was on his face now wasn't certainty anymore. It was fear. Real fear, the kind he'd put on 100 other men and never once felt himself. He understood now, far too late, what the students had known the moment Bruce rolled up his sleeve. He understood that the quiet floor sweeper had been letting him stay standing this whole time, that the fight had been over from the very first tap on the cheek, and that everything since had been Bruce deciding how merciful to be. Mishima did the only thing his pride had left him. He threw one last punch, a desperate looping right hand with every ounce of his weight and his fear and his shame behind it. Bruce caught it, not blocked it, caught it. His hand closed around Mishima's fist in midair and just stopped it dead, an inch from his own face like catching a baseball, and he held it there. He held the great undefeated champion's whole charging weight in one hand, and he didn't move, and Mishima couldn't move either, straining with everything he had against a grip he couldn't break. You could see the tendons stand out on his neck. You could see him understand in real time that he was completely helpless. And then Bruce did the thing that ended it. With his free hand, slowly, he raised one finger. And he pressed it into the middle of Mishima's chest. The exact same jab, once, then again, soft, almost polite. "This," Bruce said quietly, so only the front rows could hear, "is what it felt like." Then he stepped back and let go, and the loss of all that resistance sent Mishima staggering forward and down, until the undefeated Kyokushin champion was on both knees on the freshly swept floor, head hanging, chest heaving, in front of 30 students and 2 groaning friends. Beaten, completely, by a man he could have lifted off the ground. The room was silent, and then somebody started to clap. Bruce didn't let them clap for long. He raised a hand and the room went quiet again, and you could see, watching him, that the fire was already going back in its box. Whatever had come out of him for those 90 seconds, he was folding it up and putting it away. His breathing was already slowing. His hands had already gone soft again at his sides. He walked over to Miss Hema, who was still down on his knees, and he crouched in front of him so they were eye to eye. The two men on the floor were starting to stir, groaning, pushing themselves up on their elbows. Nobody helped them. Everyone was watching the champion and the teacher. Miss Hema couldn't look up. A grown man, a fighter who'd never lost, kneeling on a stranger's floor with his whole world turned over. He waited for Bruce to gloat, to put a boot on him, to make him sign the paper and crawl down the stairs in front of everyone. That's what Miss Hema would have done if the night had gone the other way. That's what he'd come there planning to do, and a man expects from others what he carries in himself. Bruce did none of it. "Give me the paper," Bruce said. Miss Hema reached into his jacket slow and held it out. And Bruce took it, looked at it for a moment, all those stamps and important signatures, and then he tore it in half. And in half again. And he let the pieces fall on the floor like the trash he'd been sweeping all along. "I'm not signing anything," Bruce said. "And neither are you. Nobody in this room needs a piece of paper to tell them what they just saw." Then he did the thing that none of them ever forgot, the thing they talked about more than the fight itself. He stood and he reached down and he offered Miss Hema his hand, the same hand that had just caught a punch out of the air. He offered it to help him up. Miss Hema stared at it. For a long moment he didn't move. You could see him fighting with it, the last of his pride telling him to slap it away, and something quieter telling him those days were over. Then, because there was nothing else left to do, he took it, and Bruce pulled him to his feet. "You came here certain," Bruce said to him, quiet, just the two of them now. "Certain you were the best, certain you couldn't be touched. That's the most dangerous thing a fighter can carry, and you've been carrying it for years. Today it almost got you killed in a room above a print shop. You should thank me. I just handed you the one lesson nobody in your tournaments was ever good enough to teach you." He let go of Miss Hema's hand. "There's no style that makes you untouchable. There's no rank, no trophy, no piece of paper. There's only the man in front of you and how honest you're willing to be about him. You looked at me and you saw a broom. That's not my failing. That's yours." Miss Hema didn't argue. There was nothing to argue. He gathered his two friends, one under each arm, and the three of them limped toward the stairs, smaller than they'd come in and quieter. At the door, Miss Hema stopped. He looked back at Bruce, and for a second it seemed like he might say something. His mouth opened, but there were no words big enough for what had just happened to him, so he just bowed, low. The real kind, the kind a fighter gives the one man who ever truly beat him. And then he was gone, and his boots went down the stairs and out into the Oakland night. The room let out a breath it felt like it had been holding for an hour. The students started talking all at once, and laughing, and a couple of them just sat down on the floor because their legs had gone weak. They'd come to learn how to throw a punch. They'd watched their teacher rewrite everything they thought they knew about size and strength, and what a dangerous man actually looks like. One of them would later say he learned more in those 90 seconds than in a year of drills. And Bruce walked back to the corner, where his broom was leaning against the wall right where he'd left it. He picked it up, and he went back to sweeping, the same patch of floor now scattered with broken glass and torn paper and the dust of the whole evening. He cleaned it up himself, the way he always did, because the teacher cleans his own house. He didn't say anything grand. He didn't make a speech. He just swept, slow and even, like it was any other night. Biscuit came out from under the bench. He crossed the floor, picking his way around the glass, and he wound himself once around Bruce's ankles, and then went and sat back down on his warm mat like nothing had happened at all. Bruce looked down at him, and for the first time that night he smiled. A real one. Now here's the thing to understand, the thing that finger in the chest was really about. Mishima spent his whole life measuring men by the wrong things, by their size, by their trophies, by how loud they walked into a room, and he walked right past the most dangerous man he would ever meet because that man was holding a broom and being kind to a cat. The quietest person in the room is not the weakest. Very often, he's the one with the least to prove. He's already done the proving alone, 1,000 times over where nobody was watching. He doesn't need to put his finger in your chest. He doesn't need you to know what he can do. And if you ever meet a man like that, calm and soft-spoken and content to sweep his own floor, do yourself a favor. Be very, very sure before you point a finger at his chest and tell him to fight. Because you might be looking at a broom, and he might be Bruce Lee.